Greetings everyone, welcome to Saturday here at the Jazz Record Center, and today I thought I'd make a video about a non-jazz musician named Taylor Hawkins. Like most of you who are into rock music, I guess, I learned of Taylor Hawkins passing yesterday around 10 p.m. at night. And though my channel is about jazz records, I have a long history of interviewing drummers of all stripes for 30 years for Modern Drummer magazine. I've interviewed everybody from Elvin Jones to Steve Gadd to Vinnie Colaiuta to Taylor Hawkins to Dave Grohl, to everybody in the world, really. I was really honored to do that for many years before the editorial change happened at Modern Drummer. But I interviewed Taylor Hawkins and Dave Grohl about 5 times as a whole. Taylor about 3 times, Dave Grohl a couple times, and usually with rock stars. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of rock stars. No matter how friendly they are, there's always a professional wall there. The most extreme example being when I interviewed Radiohead for Tower Pulse. Tom York came in and sat down, and I was in England to interview him, and when the hour was up, he knew exactly when it was up. There were no clocks, he didn't have a watch, he just knew, and he said, "You have your interview," and he left. He was really curt. But then Colin Greenwood from the band was the exact opposite, giving, sweet, warm, and that's what was so unusual about Taylor Hawkins as an interviewer. He was a great drummer, and his records with the Coattail Riders, to me, are more interesting artistically than any Foo Fighters record, because Taylor was way into the 70s. His favorite drummer was Roger Taylor from Queen, but he was really a 70s kid. And when I interviewed him, Dave Grohl's a great interview as well. I interviewed Dave here at the store once because Nasty Little Man, who is truly a nasty little man, the publicist, wouldn't give me another day to interview him except Friday. And I was here on that day at the store, and when I started the interview with Dave, I'm not kidding, a school bus of 30 Japanese school children came filtering through the store, and I kept having to stop the interview with Dave, and he was totally cool about it. "Hey man, go ahead." It was amazing. But Taylor, like I said, there was no wall at all when you spoke to Taylor Hawkins, as I did like 3 times for Modern Drummer, once for the Foo Fighters and for both of his Coattail Riders records. I think he only had 2. He may have had 3. But it was just like talking to some guy you knew in a band who'd made it big, but he was still your friend. There was no wall. He was so sweet. The last time I interviewed him, he was on a dirt bike, like a bicycle, riding through his old neighborhood where he used to live with his mom. He said, "This is the only way I can escape the family and do interviews is to get on my bike." So he was reminiscing, biking through his neighborhood before we even started talking about the music. And he was just that was just kind of shocking to me. That I use that as the intro for my story, because he was just it's like he was reminiscing with me about growing up with his mother and traveling around in a van and listening to Fleetwood Mac on 8-track. And it was just really unusual, really, really intimate to tell me that much about himself. And he was, whenever I interviewed him, he was so upbeat. He stood out in all the interviews I did, and always very, very self-effacing. He was a great drummer, and he was a really good rock composer. The second Coattail Riders record, I think, was heavily 70s influenced. I mean, really, and he was wearing all his influences on his sleeve, and that's a really fun record. From unusual synth parts and just great drumming. He was a great rock drummer, very different from Dave Grohl, and he would always say Dave's the better drummer. Dave Grohl is a powerhouse drummer, but Taylor was a much more artistic and intuitive drummer, and obviously lighter on his feet. He played with Alanis Morissette before he went with the Foo Fighters. And anyway, it's just such an incredible loss. I was so shocked when I saw that on Google News, and right away my good friend John Wiederhorn, writes about heavy metal, called me right away, and we were just like, what? He may have had a little drug abuse in his past, but this guy was so upbeat and full of life. I remember one time I interviewed both of them for a Foo Fighters story and something or another. Both Dave and Taylor came out of the elevator with their wives, and they just, those guys were best friends, and I'm sure the Foo Fighters and Dave Grohl are just really, really crushed. Dave Grohl has now lost 2 irreplaceable band members. So, rest in peace.